Good afternoon. My name is Sean Daraff, and I'm the Research Coordinator at the BC Centre for Employment Excellence. Before we get started with our webinar this afternoon, we're going to try a little experiment here. We're going to be using the poll feature in GoToWebinar here to basically ask you whether you've provided employment services in an online context in your experience as a practitioner. We're just curious to know what kind of experience people have working within this medium before we get started. So if you can just take a moment to fill out your answer, and we can the results will show right away on our screens here. I just want to remind you, for those of you who are familiar with our organization, the Centre was created over a year ago with funding from the provincial and federal governments to act as a research and knowledge sharing organization for BC employment service providers and employers. The Centre's mandate is not only to do innovative research, but also to find ways to share that knowledge and best practices with BC practitioners and employers. We invite you to check out our website, where you can find information and best practices, as well as tools and resources that can support you in your various roles. In particular, I'd like to encourage you to check out our newly launched BC Employment Program Hub. And this is a comprehensive database of publicly funded programs that are available to job seekers across the province. Our hope is that the Hub can assist you, the practitioner, in finding that right program that meets your client's needs. We created this webinar series as a way to reach out and connect with practitioners. Through this series, we have been highlighting new research by the Centre, but also tapping into the knowledge and expertise within the employment services community. For instance, our first event featured a study we commissioned on the current skill requirements of BC career practitioners, while our July event provided a more practical how-to session on networking and engaging employers. If you were unable to attend those webinars, I invite you to view the video recordings that we have posted on our website. Today we are pleased to feature Tanis Goddard of Training Innovations, a career development organization that has been delivering career services in BC for over 20 years. Tanis's work on providing e-career services has made her a leader not only in our province, but has also gained a lot of attention across Canada and abroad. She is frequently called on to speak to various provincial and federal departments, as well as at international conferences and symposia. She's in the process of completing her PhD on this very topic, examining the role that information and communications technologies can play in delivering employment services. I first learned of Tanis through Norm Amundsen at UBC. We were looking to pilot an online career services platform for recent post-secondary graduates, and Norm immediately suggested Tanis as an innovator in her field. With Tanis and her team, we developed and piloted Career Motion, the first demonstration project of its kind that rigorously evaluated providing services to BC job seekers exclusively online. The evaluation demonstrated the real potential of this approach, and we encourage you to look at the final report to learn more about the project. It was a pleasure to work with Tanis on Career Motion, as you'll see during the webinar today, her passion and enthusiasm for innovating and pushing the boundaries of her field is both inspiring and infectious. Before I turn it over to Tanis, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. The presentation will last approximately 45 minutes. Due to the high number of participants, we will be muting the audience throughout the presentation to ensure audio quality. We encourage you to use the questions feature on your dashboards to submit any comments or questions, and my colleague Greg will be compiling them, and we'll give 10 minutes at the end for Tanis to answer it or to have a discussion. We're continuing to experiment using the raise hands feature in GoToWebinar, and during the discussion at any time, simply raise your hand and we will unmute you in turn. Once again, we'll be recording the webinar and we'll be posting on our website after it's finished, with further opportunities for everyone to continue the conversation. And I just want to remind you, if you do lose your internet connection, please reconnect using the link that was emailed to you by the system. And if you lose your phone connection, redial the phone number, which appears under the Info tab, and rejoin. And in some cases, if you're having audio issues, we recommend that you switch over to the telephone system, as it seems to provide a better connection. And now I'd like to turn it over to Tanis to begin her presentation.
Thank you very much, Sean, and thank you for the lovely introduction, and welcome everyone. It's my honor and privilege to get to spend the next hour with you. When we looked over the, Sean, can you confirm what if you can see my screen?
No, we can't. So you'll have to just choose sharing your screen.
Can you confirm if you can see it now?
Yeah, we can see it now. Thanks, Dennis.
Excellent. Thank you. So welcome to the session, and when we looked over the group of people that had registered for the webinar, we were really excited to see that we had representation from across British Columbia attending this session. Many people attending this session are in some form connected to Work BC projects that have been running in the province, but we also have educators, counselors, consultants, so we have a really nice range of people participating this afternoon. So this is going to be a fairly quick run-through in terms of getting your mind and your awareness around how online delivery can be integrated into career development services and the kinds of things we need to consider from a design and a delivery perspective. Sean's already shared quite a bit about my background. I'll just fill in a couple of holes that will give you a little more context of who I am and why this particular topic is really relevant for me. Back in 1997, I completed coursework for my very first master's degree at the University of Calgary, and it was largely focused on adult education, career development, and online learning. And it was way back then when I was doing my own work online that I started to question and find curious the notion of what would happen if we started to use online spaces and places for career development learning. And it was particularly relevant for me because the experience of learning online was highly motivating and very engaging. And so that's really what sparked this question over time. And working with many of my colleagues here at Training Innovations who also went back and got masters in various related degrees, we started a bit of a research hub for ourselves to really look at how does this online experience come together. And then we were fortunate enough to have Service Canada at the time also very interested in this. And we were given the first Canadian pilot project in 2004 to deliver a fully integrated career decision-making and job search program. And we were fortunate enough to have that program run right through to the end of legacy programs in 2012. And that generated for us an incredible base of research from our clients that participated in that program as well as our practitioners. And so a lot of the research that we do and that I'm also doing through my PhD in international work comes from a very, very solid base of experience working with our clients in the Lower Mainland, particularly in the Sea to Sky corridor using online spaces. So as Sean said, I find myself, although I'm still very active in TII day-to-day operations, I do spend a good chunk of my time traveling now and actually working internationally with other governments and other agencies that are grappling with the question of ICT and how to set things up that are obviously cost-effective and meet the policy mandates, but that actually keep the client at the center of the question and ensuring that we are utilizing information technologies in a really productive manner. So hopefully I'll be able to bring some of those examples through in the session today. All right, so there's a picture of me. For those of you who don't know me, just so you have a visual, that's something that we do find that's very helpful in an online environment. And I'll quickly run through the objectives that we're going to look at today. I'm going to take you through a few key research perspectives and practice examples related not only to the use of online counseling within the career development services, but I'm going to broaden that and give you a perspective of how online counseling is also being delivered in a therapeutic context, because we can learn quite a lot from our psychotherapy partners who are also using online spaces. We're going to talk a little bit about the kinds of design factors that impact the choices and the potential methods and models that you can use in an online space. You know, on one hand, we want to talk about the online counseling and the actual, the flow and the relationship that happens, but there's many design considerations at the front end that are really going to have an impact on how effective any integration of online career development services are going to unfold. So we really want to take a look at that. And then we're going to move more specifically into practice strategies that you'll be able to think about and utilize in any context within which you might be practicing online, whether that's email exchanges or forums you might have or social media spaces. And we're going to talk about some of the primary tenets in our field that researchers have identified as productive working alliances and creating a mattering climate, and I'll share some feedback and research on how we can take those core tenets and use them in an online environment. And then we'll touch in on what makes strong and effective text-based communication. So as we move into the session, I wanted to give you something to reflect on. This quote by Dr. Harris Bowlesby was put out in 2005, as you can see, and she really has been a legacy person related to the use of technology. She started to do research around the integration of technology and computer guidance systems back in the 1960s. So she really has been one of the leading drivers. And she ponders this question about entering the age of cyber counseling and wondering what's going to be effective in this realm. Wondering how we take the principles of our face-to-face relationship and transfer those into an online counseling. She questions, will this actually be able to happen? Will we know what kind of clients that this is effective for? Will it be equally effective with all clients for all topics? So I want you to just hold this question in your mind as we go through the webinar this afternoon, and we'll come back to this at the Q&A stage for you to be able to reflect on and share your perspectives of what you think is happening in the field related to this. So research informing practice. We're going to look at a couple of key areas here this afternoon. We're going to look at the current use of ICT in career development, and for those of you who might not be familiar with the term ICT, it means information and communication technologies. And when you start to look at the international research around this topic, that term is largely being used as the term that reflects any sort of technology-enabled or online-enabled service space for the use of career development services. As I mentioned, we're going to touch on therapeutic counseling. I'm going to share a really interesting research study that's just come out of Finland about how career practitioners are perceiving online practice. We're going to look at some design factors and pedagogy, and then some methods and models. So within the career development industry itself, what's the state of the union, or what's happening in the field internationally? Fundamentally, there seems to be two key questions that are driving policy and practice around the integration of ICT, and they're, depending where you sit, you'll gravitate to one half of each question. Is the use of ICT to approximate face-to-face services? Are we trying to replicate face-to-face when we go online? Or in fact, are we actually trying to create and embrace new methods that will hold true to the tenets of our practice, but maybe bring in new innovations and different perspectives? You can probably guess I sit on that side of it. I think that if we've got face-to-face service, we want face-to-face service to be what it is and to continue in its very important role in the field. And then I think we want to be asking questions to see how we can innovate and integrate information technology spaces to support the development of our clients. And the other question that starts to come out is, what's driving the reason to integrate ICT? Is it for cost savings, or is it to extend access, and or can it be both? And those are the kinds of questions that at a very political level countries are grappling with in terms of how much to integrate the ICT. So what are some of the current models being used internationally? Well, one of the key things that we use in our field with technology is computer-assisted guidance systems. And most of us will be familiar with those. We will have them in our career resource centers. They will be things like choices. They'll be things like career cruising, where clients are going into a pre-created technology space, answering questions, looking at potential occupations, and really going through that sort of assessment process of trying to determine where they fit within the career field. So that was the earliest work our field did with the integration of technology. In a number of jurisdictions, particularly New Zealand, Australia, the UK, an ask an advisor model is emerging, where citizens, depending on policy of the particular country, can come to a website and ask to interact with an advisor through e-counseling. This is usually done in some form of secure email communication, but it's initiated by a user coming to a website. The other kind of model that's being used quite a bit is live chats. So an interesting example in Denmark is if any citizen goes into the Danish working space where they have course calendars, information about vocational education, there's a live e-guidance practitioner available that the individual can click a button on and start to process and evaluate what kind of educational options might work for that person. So effectively becoming an advisor online. And the other key area that technology is being integrated into our field is in more comprehensive online programs, workshops, really taking that kind of group delivery that we might do face-to-face and building it into an online space where clients are still working through career development principles and practices, but they're doing it over a more extended period of time, usually in an online space. So those are the key ways right now that our field is largely utilizing technology in a systematic way. There's obviously, emails, social media, other things that are happening, but these would be the key ways that would be being integrated at a systematic level. So I said I wanted to touch briefly on therapeutic counseling. There's a lot of research being done in the actual field of using counseling for therapeutic, so mental health counseling, anxiety, depression, self-esteem issues. And there are 6 key areas that the research ultimately summarizes, and I'm just going to hit on these briefly for you because they certainly overlay to the work that we can do in the career development field using online counseling, and certainly are aligned to the research results we've seen in the surveys that we've done with our clients. So one of the key things is just viability, and within the therapeutic research, a lot of the individuals who've participated in online counseling are speaking to the fact that they believe it's a really sustainable and viable method for gaining online therapy. So when you look at the research studies, this is something that is emerging very regularly. Another key interesting theory is looking at the notion of disinhibition. So disinhibition is really where participants describe a sense of freedom or a sense of ability to express themselves online without embarrassment, fear, or judgment. So this is, I would say, one of the most significant themes that's coming out of the therapeutic counseling, that the sense of working in one's own home, working on one's own computer, and having space to reflect is actually demonstrating that clients are moving to a sense of openness and sharing with practitioners or therapists at a faster rate than they are often in a face-to-face context. Another key theme area is the issue of cost and travel, that individuals are seeing benefit for it being somewhat less expensive. This is for people who are paying for therapy, and obviously the advantages of travel issues for people who have mobility challenges or who are in isolated regions. Another area coming out is participants really identifying a sense of relationship with their counselors online, that they're feeling care and respect, and that they're seeing that demonstrated in the behaviors of the practitioners online. The other key area that I really spend a lot of time looking at in my research is the advantages of written communication. A lot of the research coming out is talking about the participants' perceived benefit of being able to reread the messages from their therapists to their therapists, and that ultimately this kind of written exchange has allowed for greater cognitive processing and allows them to create and recreate an understanding of their thoughts and feelings as they're going through a writing process. And then the last area that's emerging in the research is really just the convenience and flexibility, that for participants they're identifying things such as absence of scheduling issues, lack of travel time and parking issues as convenient opportunities, and also the notion that the communication really is driven at a time when the client feels ready to communicate, and that often that readiness is demonstrating a greater sense of alignment for participants to be communicating those more intimate thoughts at a time that is more personally appropriate. So you can see that these areas that are coming out in therapeutic counseling research really do overlay to the kinds of work we do within the career development field. So another area that I thought was interesting is research has been done in Europe looking at, well, what are career practitioners' perceptions of the different ways that we are utilizing technology and social media in career services. And there's 4 sort of distinct areas that are emerging within this research area. One is people see it as a means for delivering information. So nobody would, I think, in this call or anybody working in the career field would deny that technology is here to stay, that the use of technology will be present and prevalent in and around the careers field. The question becomes, in what way are we using technology? And so a large number of people practicing in Europe at the moment would say that we see it primarily as a means for delivering information. So it's the notion of putting up a website and sharing information with a client. Others would see it as a medium for one-to-one communication. So there may be information up, but it's also a space where we could be having one-to-one information and dialogue with a client through email or some other space for communicating. The third area is actually seeing it as an interactive workspace. So actually believing that we can create through technology a space that would have information and interaction and a sense of dynamism, that it becomes interactive in a space to actually conduct the career development work with the client. And the fourth area that's emerging as perceptions is that it is an impetus for paradigm change and reform. And what this kind of refers to is the notion of utilizing social media where clients and practitioners are coming into that space together and actually co-creating information and knowledge. So it's shifting the paradigm from the career development practitioner solely as the expert into something that is more co-creative in the field. And this research was just conducted this year, so it's a very timely sort of snapshot of, I think, how, in general, our field is orienting to this technology. And I'm sure each one of you could look at this and sort of put yourself in a space of how you are currently utilizing technology or your comfort zone for utilizing technology in career development. So I'm going to go fairly quickly through this slide and mostly just point to when the notion that when we start to talk about utilizing technology in the careers field, there are many things we have to consider. The technology-enabled service is doomed to failure if we basically just jump online and say, okay, I'm going to grab this piece of technology and I'm going to start working with my clients, because there's a number of factors that we have to consider. We have to consider policy, whether that's at a local level, at a school level, at a Work BC Center level, or if that's actually at a governmental level, designing the integration of how ICT can support processes, really understanding what is the policy of career development in general within a particular department or program, and then how does that translate into the online space. Obviously, we need to be assessing access and readiness issues, so access to technology, access to practitioners who want to use technology, readiness for organizations to engage, and then once that assessment's done, obviously putting in place change management processes to move from the familiar of the face-to-face to the utilization of an online space. Obviously, really important to know what the intention and goals are. Generally, if one says, I just want to go online because it's interesting, it's going to be doomed to failure if we can't tie it back to what the metrics or what the goals are about why we're actually choosing to utilize and integrate this additional space. Then we need to think about what we think about careers theory, what kind of approach and orientation we are as practitioners and as program developers, and how that has to translate into the online space. Obviously, we need to make some selections of the technical tools that we're going to use to meet these assessments that we've done. We need to make sure that we have a really strong support and evaluation component into the launch of any sort of online service, and really have to pay attention to for ourselves as practitioners, as well as the end user, what our competence and confidence is in with technology. Often we need to build into the actual delivery processes the capabilities to increase technical competence for both practitioners and for end users. So what I am going to go a little bit further on from the design perspective is a little bit more about technology considerations. So when we start to think about the various tools and technologies that exist, there are some kind of key questions we can start to think about. when we approach the various technologies. One of the things we have to ask ourselves is what is the length of the service? Is this something that is like the Danish example I suggested, where it's a quick chat because somebody's looking at another piece of context or content, and so it's a very transactional kind of exchange? Is the length of service going to be something that's extended over days, weeks, potentially months? Really understanding sort of how you want the length of the interaction is going to impact the type of tool you choose for longevity purposes. We have to evaluate the client's access to the technology. Are we buying something that has a license that has an impact to whether clients are going to be able to get into that technology or not? Is the technology set up in such a way that it's really user-friendly? A lot of the research that we've done has really shown, particularly working with clients that are in workplace transition, who are anxious, nervous, upset, stressed about their financial situation, that the technology integration for them needs to be incredibly seamless. It needs to not be really loud, and there can't be too many options that could take somebody in too many directions without focusing on the purpose at hand. So really thinking about what the client has access to, and then how accessible that technology is going to be for a client when they're coming in and logging in. Another really key consideration around the issue of technology is the issues, obviously, of privacy, data, and ethics. So really determining in the context of your work what level of privacy security do you need to have with any technology you open up. Are you setting up a Facebook page and it really is just about sharing events that might be happening in your community? That might be okay, but you probably don't want to be doing something in that space where you're actually asking individuals to be talking about themselves, because A, it's public, and B, there is no sort of data encryption that would actually secure that information. We even run into those issues with email. Very few email programs go through the process of data encryption, so that even the exchanges we have with our clients by email are not really at that security level that we would expect for things like online banking. So really determining where you need to be evaluating privacy, data, and security is important as you go through the technology selection. Also evaluating is the role of in-person communication. So, very, very rarely will most of the career development service begin and end online. There's usually some interface of a client within a program, whether that's coming in for a preliminary needs assessment, whether that's being at a career center, whether that's working in a school guidance environment. There's usually some form of face-to-face that then facilitates the integration of an online space. So being clear about the relationship between in-person and online communication is really important. I've already briefly talked about the skills of the counselor. Obviously, you need to select technology that's going to be usable by the practitioners that are engaging in the program. And then really looking at the role of the client and counselor in the service. What is that relationship, whether that's based on policy or theory, and what kind of technology space is going to support the actual kind of client and counselor relationship that you have. So these are just some things that you can go through when you're starting to look at technology, and questions you can begin to ask yourself of how well a particular technology tool can meet some of the requirements that you might have in your service delivery model. And obviously there's many different types of tools. This is not even barely a smattering of the things that are available, from communications tools, information tools, meeting tools, social media, learning platforms. Really, depending on the scope and approach of your online, you're going to be evaluating the various tools available to you in different regards. All right, so we're going to just take a moment and talk a little bit about the actual learning design. So when we go to develop any program, when we're making face-to-face programs, creating career centers, creating workshops for our clients, we always have to start and think, well, what's the approach to learning that we're trying to do, and what are we actually trying to ensure happens when we go through this process? And a lot of my research in the last decade has really focused on this question of pedagogy and design. And based on the research, based on the international work that's happening in the field, and also significantly based on the feedback that we've had over many years from our clients and the practitioners doing this work, is we've really come to discover or unfold a model that really any interactions online need to consider about how you're going to design that space. So the first thing that we've learned is, it's really useful if you can integrate some information about relevant career concepts. So rather than just saying, drop me an email if you have any questions, if we know a client's struggling with how to do a skills assessment, giving them some content that they can work through to begin to understand that will enrich in their thinking and their capability to actually interact about the particular career need that they have. The second area that really needs to be factored into technology design is personal application. So that's, not just leaving a website that says, here's a bunch of information, but giving people tools, strategies, spaces to actually start to apply that to oneself. So not simply saying, this is how you do a personal skills assessment or a transferable skills assessment, but then giving people opportunities and actual tools to apply that to their own personal needs. And then the third area that really seems to bring the whole process together using online spaces is the interaction itself. So how the client and the e-practitioner are communicating, at what moments they're communicating, in what strategies they're communicating. It could also be, and we certainly have in the past had group counseling programs online so that clients could communicate with other clients and provide support to each other. So it definitely is emerging that it is the interplay of these three functions that make a very sustainable and interactive and effective online delivery model. And Sean had talked briefly about the career motion research project we did a number of years ago, and that research project essentially had information and personal application. The essence of the research project and the funding that we had didn't allow us to actually integrate the interaction with an e-career practitioner. So we took all the principles that we knew about how to effectively put out information and personal application activities, and although we still had success with clients in their ability to navigate, one of the key pieces of output that came from the focus group was that it would have been so much more effective if they could have interacted with a practitioner to help them make meaning of the learning that they had going on. So we certainly see that really placing where that interaction occurs is critical for effective meaning making in an online environment. Okay, I'm going to need to go fairly quickly through this next section. I'll give you a bit of perspective on how to scope program models because I want to make sure we have sufficient time to look at the practice itself. So one of the things you're probably hearing as we talk about this today is, there's many ranges you can approach this. You can have sort of a more self-directed approach for clients. You could have light touch counseling. You could have more in-depth counseling. You could have very personalized content. You could have themed content such as, a selection of topics that clients interact with to help them select their next work target. Or you could have very comprehensive content, which would have been the case of our Career Evolutions program that was a very intensive 4-week program that had 25 learning units, that had clients completing many activities and interactions together. So there's a scoping model that we can look at. And I'll let you know that this, as Sean said, this webinar will be available online and you'll be able to come back into these slides so you can actually pull more data as you want. So this matrix really shows us what happens when we start to look at the relationship of the depth of content with the scope of the counselor engagement, to what degree clients can select content, how pre-assessments might support light counseling, and really how the practitioner can access content and integrate knowledge and materials throughout the process for clients. We can look at themed content, thinking about how activities are organized to make it effective in a self-directed environment, determining what kind of dialogue relationship you have between that bite-sized content, and how practitioners can serve as a thread to support that meaning making. Then when we move into more comprehensive content, really we're talking about a process that is serving a source of, or is a source of facilitation throughout in terms of the engagement of the practitioner and the client, that it's highly interactive, that most of the work is done in a very constructive means to focus on dialogue between the practitioner and clients and support the client's experience. when we look at self-directed light and in-depth counseling and we think about our technology requirements, we start to be able to put into place that other list that I was going through with you. So if it's self-directed, it needs to be obviously very easy to navigate. Clients need control, and the content needs to be highlighted, revisited, and repeated for clients. If we're moving into the more counseling space, we have bigger issues about privacy and protection. We need to consider asynchronous tools because we're not always going to be online at the same time as our client. Ways to group control content, and then when we get into the more really in-depth sort of work with clients, we not only need those things, but we need progress tracking, we need integration of asynchronous and synchronous tools, we need client and to counselor interactions, client-to-client interactions, and then usually also some sort of reporting and follow-up mechanism within the technology. So this is just another way to think about how you would evaluate the technology means that could be available to you. Within our particular context, we have tried a number of different things for service models. So I described to you our Career Evolutions program that was a 4-week program. Within our Skills Connect for Immigrants program, we do some face-to-face workshops that's followed by 2 weeks of online support, working within a cohort and a practitioner to really make meaning of the work that they had done in a face-to-face. In our Work BC centers, we have customized sessions that are focused on work targeting and job search services. So clients can come into a coordinated program over 2 weeks full of individual sessions that they participate in support with their practitioner to achieve the goals that were established. And in our Encore program, which is a targeted initiative for older worker program, we have our clients who complete a very intense face-to-face curriculum during the day focused on employability skills, customer service, really tangible skill building, and they actually do their career counseling, the application of this to themselves in the evenings in an online space. So we can really maximize the training time during the day, and then the clients actually go on, and they really do. They go on and they spend evening time personalizing that learning to their particular context. So this just gives you an example of a few different ways you can think about how online services could be integrated to support different kinds of programming. So I'm going to move now in the presentation over to some particular examples about what happens within the online practice. And the definition, as you can see here, that we generally use when we're talking about this is that it's a learning and counseling that takes place using a web space where the helping relationship occurs through the use of synchronous and asynchronous communication methods. So synchronous methods being live. So we're having a synchronous exchange right now. It could be through web meetings. It could be through live chats. And asynchronous is more typically the type of timed interactions that happen with communications such as email. So ultimately, the online practicing is both a collaborative and a self-directed process because we are creating a space and interacting with our clients in a collaborative model, but the clients also have the opportunity to really determine when they want to interact with the program, when they want to interact with the materials. Do they have their best reflection time in the evenings once the kids are to bed and the dishes are done, or is it somebody that loves to get up at 5 in the morning and do their reflection then? So we're actually giving a lot more power to the client in an online delivery because they get to have significant influence in how they want to spend their time, and then their e-counselor is available to them to respond asynchronously when they get into the office and receive the client's feedback. So the kinds of things I am very fortunate that I work with probably thousands of practitioners a year in various country contexts. And the kinds of things that we hear are very consistent. I think from a career practitioning standpoint, we have questions, we have doubts. We wonder if a practitioning relationship can really form online. We wonder if it works. We wonder how it works. We wonder if it's ethical. We wonder if the online work can be professionally rewarding. So those may be some of the questions you're sitting on and some of the things you're going to need to evaluate as time passes, because what we know is technology is going to be integrated into our work in various forms, and that governments internationally are looking at how to do that, in part for cost savings, in part for policy directives. There's many reasons why people might be looking at it, and as practitioners, we've got to get our head around how we feel about these questions. When you take on e-career practitioning and you start to move your practice into an online space, we find that you also are adopting different roles and perspectives. So this slide just sort of reminds us that not only are you doing the facilitation of a career development process, but you might be working with groups of clients online, you might be adding resources to the content, to the materials that clients need. You might be designing things, you might be designing a PowerPoint, you might be designing materials, activities for clients. You likely will have some administrative functions in terms of, getting your technology set up, getting clients enrolled into those systems, making sure people are where they need to be. And certainly another competency that's required is confidence in the technology yourself, because when clients are often first entering into technology, whatever that technology is, they're excited, they show up, they're eager to please, they're eager to engage, and one small technology issue like, minimizing a screen that they can't find, or using a browser that doesn't have a technology marked for a trusted site can really set panic into a client, and that's certainly not what we want to have happening as they're integrating into an online career development program. So feeling really confident as practitioners about how we can talk to clients on the phone, use email to actually resolve some of the technical challenges they might be having is actually a really critical component to the roles that we have when we move into e-career practitioning. So I'm going to ask you to reflect on this quote as I go through and talk a little bit more about the various kinds of practitioning roles that we play. I really like this quote. It's by a researcher in the UK. Her name is Kate Anthony, and she really is on the side of therapeutic counseling, but it's an interesting perspective when she says that the rapport between practitioner and client in cyberspace is developed not by reacting to another person's physical presence and spoken word, which we're very familiar with, but by entering the client's mental construct via the written word. So it really is reminding us that when we move our relationship in career practitioning to an online space, our first and primary interactions are no longer body language and that kind of familiarity in a face-to-face context, but that we are really starting to interact with clients through the words that we choose and the clients choose in the practitioning environment. Oops, sorry, I just need to go back. I'm just going to touch briefly on the notion of working alliance. This is really seminal research in terms of what are key things that we have to have in any sort of helping profession to build a strong working alliance. And I think we have to go back to these tenets when we start to look at the online space to ensure that we are meeting these requirements. So we need to make sure that we have established goals with our clients, that we know why we're doing the things we're doing with them, that we know what the return to work intention is, and we need to return to that, I would say, whether face-to-face or online on a regular basis to validate and verify that we're making the progress that we need. The actual engagement and collaboration between the client and practitioner of the things that we do in online space, the tasks of it have to engender confidence. So the reflective questions, the strategic communication, guided chats, the actual tasks of doing those things online has to demonstrate a sense of engagement and collaboration. And a bond is so critical for any human service relationship. If our clients don't feel bonded to us, don't feel that we have their best interest at heart, that we are there to help them engage in success, then the foundation of a working alliance can't be felt. And when we move into an online space, we have to think about different strategies for how to affect and evoke that bond, how to make ourselves feel real and accessible through the distance of technology. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with Norm Amundsen's work on mattering climate, and I wanted to, I'm going to take a couple minutes here and just sort of talk about strategies that we've learned about how to integrate his notion of mattering climate into an online environment. And these are the 4 levels that Norm talks about that, you know, we need to be noticed by a person, we have to have visibility, we have to feel really important, we have to create opportunities for clients to offer help as well, and that we have to have belief in that personal and professional relationship. And Norm uses a really neat acronym when he talks about what are the kinds of key things we have to do in practitioning for that to occur. And the first one he talks about, oh goodness me, sorry, back up. The first one he talks about is protecting, and so from an online perspective, some of the things we have to do in that regard is make sure that the online space is secure, confidential, authentic, that it's designed in accordance with public funding requirements, and that we're following through on all of our stated intentions and commitments. If we've told a client we're going to make contact at X time or within X time, we need to ensure that we're really following through on those things that we've said. Listening in an online environment is paying attention to the word selection a client uses, the tone, the structure of their written communication, the activities a client has engaged in, the spaces of inactivity a client might have, the patterns of participation that the client engages in. Paying attention to all of these things are a key component in the online space to understand a client's story because we're piecing together a composite because the client isn't sitting directly in front of us. Inquiring really in online is inquiring on the text-based exchanges, expressing interest, seeking clarifications, and demonstrating a real curiosity about the events that a client shares with us, particularly in their written word. Acknowledging is demonstrating an awareness of the client's presence, letting the client know that you see them online, letting the client know that you have additional resources to provide them as their story continues to unfold. That's going to give the client a sense of feeling acknowledged. And supporting the client, there's a number of ways online that we have to support a client. We have to express encouragement as a client arrives, express confidence that we're going to be successful together in this online space, and really engage with the client as they start to begin to interact with you. Highlight a client's progress by linking back to earlier perspectives that were shared in that process. Encourage clients to share learnings and perspectives with other clients if you're in a group environment. So looking at different ways to really support the development for the clients. And exchange some information about ourselves. We know that, you know, appropriate levels of self-disclosure are really important in building a strong working alliance with our clients. So use pictures, use videos about yourself, put your biography up, do things that exchange information about yourself to the client to ensure that they can see you and feel that you're a real person that's engaging with them in the online space. So those are some of the things we've learned about how to take Norm's work from Mattering Climate and move it into an online environment. I think I've covered most of these points here, so I'm just going to go on to the next slide and talk very briefly about the actual act of counseling in text. This is a quote that I really harken back to when we're doing some of this work. When I write, I think. And I think that really is giving a perspective of how the online career development process can support clients, because we're creating for them a sense of space and reflection that allows them to reflect upon the ongoing development that they're having. So when you approach counseling through text, it's really important to think about your client, their goals, where they are in their process. You know, it's really important if you've been in an extended relationship with a client in online communication that you scan your previous communication before you write your next response, because you want to make sure that in your responses you're demonstrating an integration and a meaning making of the whole perspective of the client as you go through that counseling process. It's really important to assess your clients and your own emotional and cognitive frame of reference. If you're having a bad day or you're having a bad moment and you're not feeling at your best, you're probably not going to write at your best either. So trying to time your own responses as a practitioner as you translate your thinking and your practice into text-based communication, you have to be incredibly self-reflective and reflexive of knowing where your strengths and your limitations lie as well. Assess the availability of time and the urgency of the situation. You know, if you've received a message from a client and they're going to an interview in a couple of hours, you know, if you've got synchronous methods to communicate via chat, maybe even the phone, you know, you'd really want to prioritize that so that your interactions with the client met their priorities. And again, you know, considering the most effective communication strategy, maybe it's the phone, maybe it's chat, maybe it's an email, but you start to have to look at what are the various communication mechanisms you have and what's going to be the most effective way to reach the client in the context of the situation. It's also important in text-based counseling that we develop a matching strategy with clients, that we try to you know, match, give or take the level of communication the client's giving. So if the client's really communicating in point form, that's probably an indication if you write 4 paragraphs back in really structured sentences that that's not going to necessarily meet the client's perspective on how they like to receive and interact with communication. So we need to be the flexible ones to understand what we think is going to work best with the clients that we're interacting with. And then we need to pay attention to our tone, our clarity, our rhythm in the messages. How are we structuring that actual text-based counseling to reach the clients that we're serving? I think I've covered most of these things. You know, purposeful online guidance is, you know, making sure as practitioners we're sharing our observations, we're summarizing what we hear from the client, we're linking, we're questioning the client, expanding the dialogue. We're going back and revisiting the development that clients have through their online narrative. One of the most powerful things that we've discovered is when working with a client over an extended period of time is the power of being able to go back into some of the early work you may have done with the client and literally copy and paste their own words, the own things that they had said early in a process up against maybe current words that they're using that may demonstrate a greater degree of optimism or learning about themselves or clarity of career decisions. So that ability to help the client see their own narratives and shape that in a constructive way, for me, is one of the most interesting facets of being able to look at services being delivered online. So to close the session, who's engaging and what's working? So this slide just tells us a little bit about the clients that were participating in the program we used to run, which was Career Evolutions. Some of the things you might note here is often there's an assumption that online programming is only for youth, and Career Evolutions was just one of many interventions that were available in legacy programming. All of the clients that chose to take an online intervention had the opportunity to participate in a career decision-making or job search program face-to-face. So this age breakdown really represents client self-selection into the medium and the choice to participate in career development online. And then we see a little bit about some of the effects that learners have had, the importance of the online dialogue with practitioners, obviously the #1 area for them, completing activities, engaging with practitioners. So, you know, you can get a sense of these are the things that seem most important. And when we did have discussion forums in group environments, interestingly enough, in this juncture, we only had about 37% of our clients really thinking that that discussion forum with other participants was beneficial to them. And we think a lot of that is because there was so much interaction with the practitioner and the client, and it was so incredibly targeted to the client's needs that they were really getting that sense of community and support from that interaction. So I will close there and turn the session back over to Sean. I'm going to go back to the reflective consideration that might just spark some questions or answers, or sorry, questions that you might like to pose to me. So I'll turn it back to you, Sean.
Okay, thank you very much, Tanis. This is Greg Lockwood, Stakeholder Coordinator for the Center for Employment Excellence. And we have time to moderate, to answer a few questions. So please, once again, feel free to type your question into the question box, which is one of the options in your control panel on GoToMeeting. Or the other option, too, that we still haven't used yet, but we're absolutely open to trying this, is if you click on the raise hands feature and you do have access to a microphone, and we'll be happy to unmute you and take your question. And just before we get started with the questions, I'm going to ask Tanis, did you get a chance to see the results from the poll from the beginning of the webinar, Tanis?
No, I haven't yet, Greg. That would be great to see.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot. And the question was, have you ever delivered employment services to a client primarily in an online context? Now, Tanis, what do you think, if you had to take a guess, what was the percentage of people that responded yes?
Let's go with 20%.
It's actually about double that. It was 41%.
Excellent. That's exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting. 41% of our participants have delivered employment services to a client primarily in an online format. So there you go, about 2 out of every 5 participants.
That's a very, very big change to what we would have seen, even just a couple of years ago. So that's really fantastic to see that there's that many of us starting to move into practice this way. And I'm sure many of you that are doing practice must have been nodding your head and sort of seeing some of the challenges and opportunities that we were talking about today in the context of your work.
Tanis, we had a comment from one of our participants about, really it's almost like a comment on the medium about the limitations of this kind of format. Basically, the inability to see what, especially in a webinar format, you can't see whether people are struggling to process the information that's being given them. Do you find that that's an issue when you're doing online counseling? Is that and how would you be addressing that as a practitioner?
Right. Well, Sean, it's a really interesting observation question because I actually find the webinar format fairly challenging. It's definitely not my preferred delivery method because it feels very one-directional in many ways. It feels very pedantic. I feel, so many of you have so much to offer in this conversation, and you're gracious enough to give me the floor for the hour, and I'm just sort of talking and trying to put, some structure together that makes sense for people that I hope is hitting the mark. But there's very little interaction that I can have with any of you where you could challenge the question, I could give another perspective, we could exchange about it, I could say let me think about that tomorrow, I'll send you another resource. All that kind of interaction is missing in this particular format, and that's why if we go back to the session, some of the things I was sharing in the session, that when we're building any environment that is an online space that's going to actually be about learning and counseling is really going to be about doing that meaning making and constructing understanding with clients, that we always build it with 3 components, which is the sharing of some information, which has been basically all you've had from me today is just information. So that's 1/3 of that relationship. Then there's interactions that the client have with that information, however they get that information. The information could be text, video, a book, but what are we asking the client to do to make meaning of that information, to make it relevant to themselves? And then that 3rd area, certainly Sean, you and I are very aware of what happens when the interaction isn't supported, where the practitioner is not really engaging with the client and having productive dialogue and conversation. So I think that this kind of environment, the webinar, is actually a very poor representation of what a highly interactive and well-designed counseling space can actually give to clients.
Great.
Did I get your question?
I think that answers it. Yes, thanks for the very detailed response, Tanis. We have a couple of more questions that have come in. Actually, a few more are sort of rolling in now. The first one is it's for you, Tanis. With regard to the research into the efficacy of the therapeutic counseling process via an ITC medium, has there been any research into the possible disadvantages of written communication within this context?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that, that question just, it points to there's always 2 perspectives. So what's generally being found in the therapeutic research is that the kinds of things that I was presenting are generally the outcomes. So in general, in a sort of controlled study format, where the research is pointing to, for most people, it is a useful and workable environment. But there's always outliers on all kinds of research, and so clients that have really difficult situations, there could be any number of factors that would make the written communication difficult for someone. Certainly if somebody expresses, I don't like writing, it's not comfortable for me, then you wouldn't want them to be in that environment. I mean, I think whatever kind of counseling we're doing, one has to just, you have to do an assessment with the client and determine, is the media method model actually fitting the needs that individual has. So certainly, there's going to be situations where it's not a good fit, but the overwhelming research coming out is that, as I say in controlled studies, that online is faring equal to, and in some instances having some advantages over the face-to-face therapeutic research. We unfortunately have none of that research in the career development context yet.
Okay, next question is we just lost it. What format do you use for follow-up activities for clients to access extra resources that they may need for sorry, we just got a bit of a typo here, for their for homework between sessions?
In our particular context, we use a learning environment. So some of you might be familiar with Moodle or Blackboard. We have our own learning environment that we created years ago that we use. And within that learning environment, we structure the experience that has a combination of the information, activities online that clients need to participate in. So that would be sort of akin to the homework space. And practitioners can actually see the work the clients are completing, and clients know that it's a transparent process, so that as the clients are completing their activities and they're learning, practitioners are reading it, and then they're entering into a dialogue of discussion about what is happening and what learning is occurring with the client. I'm not sure if I've totally hit the question that the member was asking, so obviously if further clarification is required, please pass it on.
Okay, and just a quick question on someone's asking, what is Blackboard?
Learning management systems are comprehensive systems that have, they're quite technology heavy. They have the capability to store materials, content, much like a website, but then they have a number of interactive spaces where clients can interact one-to-one with the practitioner, one-to-many in groups. They can store e-portfolio materials, for example. So the technology called Blackboard and the technology called Moodle are both examples of these comprehensive learning management systems.
Okay, and final question, Tanis. How do you find the written communication level of the client can limit their participation in learning?
I think that it kind of harkens back to that earlier question. If a client is really uncomfortable to put words to their experience, obviously that's going to have some real challenges, and I think that needs to be evaluated. And that's certainly something, when clients are coming into the online option versus a face-to-face option, that we're doing some evaluation with. But I think the other piece about that is we don't need to expect our clients to be, incredibly articulate and write perfect sentences with perfect grammar, because, even if we're getting sort of some more point form communication or not in its full grammar structure, we might be getting at some really intimate thoughts from that person. So I think, it's in some regards it's a little bit less about the writing skills and more about the willingness or capability of somebody to begin to reveal what this feeling is that they were having. We talked about that as the disinhibition effect earlier, and we had a little phrase that we used to use for years around here, saying what we found in the online programs, because we always had the benefit of running many face-to-face programs simultaneously as we were doing our online. And the practitioners who had worked in both programs, said that what they found in the online space is that clients went deeper with their revelations, and they got richer communication faster than they were getting in sort of a group-based career development delivery. The one last thing I'll comment about language and communication in an online space as well is that it's been very interesting for us to work with immigrants in an online space, because, and particularly clients with English as an additional language, because there may be some assumptions made that would be very difficult, but the other feedback that we've had is for some of those individuals, a face-to-face session can feel quite highly pressurized to have an answer, a response. And so this blended approach that we're doing, where we're doing some group work and then actually carrying that group work into personalized dialogue, has been a really successful and impactful outcome in terms of watching how clients use that language communication to actually make meaning of something that happened in a face-to-face context.
Okay. Well, thank you very much again, Tanis. It was a presentation which I'm sure has introduced many new ideas and insights about online counseling for many of our participants. There were a few more questions that did roll in right at the end, which is great to see. And what we're going to do is post those questions anonymously on our blog that it's under the Join the Conversation link from this homepage. And that's where you'll be able to view the recorded webinar and ask additional questions along with the questions that were posed right at the end. And hopefully, Tanis, you'll be able to help us out there with responding to some of those questions.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to.
Fantastic. So thanks again to all of you for attending the webinar today. Again, we recorded the event and we'll post the video of the presentation on our website to continue the conversation there. Shortly, you will receive an email with a link to the presentation video. Unfortunately, we have found that the system does not record those of you connecting only by phone as having attended, so you may receive an email saying that we're sorry you were unable to attend. If that's the case and you would like a confirmation of your attendance, please contact us at the address in the email. As always, we welcome your input and feedback. We would also appreciate any suggestions you have for future webinar topics. And if you haven't already, please sign up for our newsletter and watch our website for the announcement of our November webinar, which will be on the topic of supporting clients who are interested in self-employment. And on behalf of the entire team at the BC Centre for Employment Excellence, thank you and have a great afternoon.